and welcome you all again to Let's Do Lunch, taking the woo-woo out of the mind-body connection. Born out of lack of connection in the pandemic, I miss my friends, and so do you. I'm bringing every month some of the accomplished women in my life who I have the privilege of calling a friend to chat with me and chat with you about a topic they are passionate about. That is why I am thrilled today to have my dear friend, double board certified endocrinologist, that's a hormone doctor, and certified life coach, Dr. Karen Barnard, to talk about taking the woo woo out of the mind body connection. Karen, welcome. Oh, you're on mute. We want to hear you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, Randy, and I'm also feeling very privileged to be able to call you a friend and to talk with you about one of my favorite topics.
The privilege is all mine, and our participants are going to see this afternoon exactly why. I know this is a topic, Karen, that you and I are both so passionate about, and it's personally been a huge source of learning and transformation for me. I've learned so much from you. I feel like my clients learn a lot about themselves when we talk about this. And while we get into this, we want to hear from you in the chat. Just fill this sentence out for us. My body is. So just pop that into the chat, just wherever you are today. My body is, and we're going to come back to this. And while we wait to hear from you, Karen and I were talking about this the other day. How many times do people ask us how we're doing? We say we feel great, or we tell ourselves we're fine, when actually we have a pit in our stomach, or a lump in our throat, or bags under our eyes, or a pain in our back. So often as women, we are told that we have a higher EQ, and yet we power through so much discomfort in our lives. So what about the EQ of our body? Luckily, we have an expert in Karen to tell us everything we need to know today, and we'll be discussing how we take the woo-woo out of the mind-body connection and about the science and tactics that women need to know to live better and feel better. So let me just formally introduce Karen and tell you just how exceedingly impressive she is and how privileged we are to have her here today with the Something Major community. After graduating from medical school in 1989, Dr. Karen Barnard moved to the U.S., where she trained and practiced as an academic specialist, physician, and endocrinologist. Over her career, she has had the privilege of caring for patients, teacher trainees, doing research, and holding a variety of educational and administrative leadership positions. Dr. Barnard retired from clinical medicine in 2020 to dedicate herself full-time to life and leadership coaching, and she is a phenomenal coach. She is passionate about partnering with high-performing, emerging, and current leaders in medicine and other professions. She particularly loves helping them connect with their vision, inner wisdom, and guiding principles in order to lead with clarity and confidence, something she's going to help us do today by bridging this mind-body gap. Lastly, Dr. Barnard holds an adjunct clinical professor of academic medicine position at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, where she joins us today. And she is the principal and owner of Dr. Karen Barnard, LLC, her life and leadership coaching business. This goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway. What we discussed today is not medical advice. Please ask her questions. Please stay curious, but please do consult with your physician if you have any specific questions. Karen, did I get that right?
Yes, you did. And thank you so much for that very generous introduction.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And I just want to say, I'm reading in the chat, Karen, what people shared with us. And I love this. We have people chiming in from all over. We have people all the way from Pennsylvania to Scotland. So thank you all to those of you who have joined us today. And we're hearing from folks, my body is my home. My body is interconnected. My body is intuitive. My body is what allows me to move through the world and experience life. My body is relaxed. And I love this one. My body is supporting me in everything I like to do. My body is full of love. I love that.
Oh, wow. This group of participants is already ahead of the curve. And I'm looking so forward to helping them dig deeper into the intelligence of their bodies.
And while we do that, Karen, what I would love is if you could guide us through, we're going to be talking about the mind-body experience. Can we experience, I know that you have an exercise for helping us arrive at the present moment. Would you kick us off by walking us through one of your exercises for doing this?
Yeah, I'd love to. And so as we arrive all from different places, and maybe some of us had to rush to get here on time, let's just take a moment to appreciate where we are right now. So look and see where you are in relation to the room you're sitting in. If there's another living being in the room with you, just notice that. And notice where you are in relation to your chair and your desk, or maybe you're lying on the couch. And then turn your attention inward. And if you need to, kind of just close your eyes to do this. And become aware of your feet. Notice where they're touching the surface. Maybe there's firmness underneath. Maybe some tingling, warmth, or coolness. Or maybe you're just not really feeling anything in your feet at this moment. And now bring your attention to your seat, to the sits bones, that part of the skeleton that's supporting your body. And notice where it touches the supporting surface. Maybe there's softness or firmness, maybe some pressure. And then finally, bringing your attention to your breath. And some of you may notice as you become aware of your breath, you want to change it. You may feel like you want to take a nice deep breath, or you may sit up straighter to become more aware of it. Whatever is happening in this moment for you, just notice. And then we can all open our eyes and appreciate this present moment for exactly the way it is.
Karen, I felt my energy completely shift, and I want to ask our group in the chat again one more time. My body is. Fill that in for us. I know that my body feels a lot more relaxed than it did 2 minutes ago. So thank you, Karen. I am so excited to jump in with you. And I want to ask you on a personal note, right? We're seeing people, in the chat that they just feel more present. This is clearly a topic that you are such an expert on. On a personal note, what first got you interested?
Well, it dates back to my time in medical school where I became fascinated just with the mechanics of the body, the complexity of the anatomy and physiology. And one of the reasons I went into endocrinology was because I loved how hormonal control was so finely tuned with fine feedback loops and just the overall complexity and intrigue around the body. But it really wasn't until I actually went on a silent meditation retreat back in 2013 that I became aware of the aliveness that's in my body, of the sensations, the emotions, the thoughts, and really had to kind of sit with them. And fast forward a little bit further on in years, it was my body, Randi, that really signaled to me my burnout. I had become exhausted. I had become worsening my migraines, terrible intensity. I had all sorts of aches and pains. And it was really at that juncture that I was forced to put it all together and really launch my exploration into the mind-body connection and to this incredible wisdom that our body has. And that's where I am in the present moment. I still continue to practice on my own and with my clients in using the body to help us live our best lives, help us harness that intelligence to show up in the way we really want to in the world.
And it's so true, Karen. Burnout can be so physical, especially for women. We push ourselves. I know for me in my life, I did not know what burnout looked like until years ago my hair started falling out of my head. I did not know what exhaustion felt like until a very scary moment I had when I dozed off at the wheel of my car. And I think that's some of what's gotten me curious about this topic, which is what were the signals that my body was sending to me before? Because they definitely were throwing up the red flag. And I'm really, really excited to talk to you about how we can start to harness this intelligence earlier in the cycle so that we can think about both cultivating that kind of intuitive, relaxed state of ease that helps us be our best, and also be aware of stress and maybe where our body is sending us a signal that we shouldn't power through even if our minds are. To that end, I know a lot of people, and I used to be one of them, When they think about the mind-body connection, they think about crystals and auras, and there's no offense to people if that's your thing. But there also is a growing body of scientific research on the mind-body connection, on neuroscience, on endocrinology, a topic of which you are an expert. Can you walk us through what you think some of the most important data is out there for those of us who are really interested in the science?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's so fascinating, Randy. And as you say, it's an area that's really blooming, and it's relatively in its infancy, and it's constantly changing as we figure out, as new research is being done. So what I might say today may even be a little bit different in our thinking, next year. So that's the exciting piece. It's continually evolving. I also want to say that what I talk about here is really come from my own exploration and from leaning heavily on the work of neuroscientists, social scientists, and psychologists. And I'll mention some names as I go along. And so I try to be as robust as I possibly can, and I pair it with my own experience. So that's the place I'm coming from. And I'd say the very first thing for me that was such a breakthrough was I used to believe that that our intelligence was housed in this brain that's above the neck. And this was the conductor, the supreme leader, and the body was enslaved to it. The body was basically this machine that could be fixed, could break, could help us do what we need to do, but really the supremeness of our intelligence was above our neck. And the reality and the wonderful truth is that our intelligence is actually distributed throughout our body, from this prefrontal cortex area behind our forehead all the way down into the tips of our toes and the tips of our hands. And this intelligence system is embedded everywhere. It's interconnected. And so really we think as a body, not just as a brain. And one of the most wonderful sort of metaphors and sort of ways to think about this that I got from the work primarily of Amanda Blake, but there are some other researchers as well, is to think of this body, and I'm going to geek out just for a few seconds if you'll indulge me.
Geek away. We want to hear the geeky neuroscience. I know we have some people here today who are just dying to hear this, so please geek out with us.
So if we think, using this metaphor of the orchestra, we have different sections of the orchestra. We have the wind section, the bass section, and the other instruments of the other sections of the orchestra. And so also with our bodies, we have sort of what I think of as 5 primary sections. The first is what we call exteroception. So those are the sensations that of vision. So as you're looking now, you're using that. As you're hearing, maybe listening to my voice. Maybe you're eating something and you're tasting and you're smelling. You're feeling the temperature in the room. That's one section of your orchestra.
So Karen, is that like our 5 senses?
It's our 5 senses coupled with some other sensations, our ability to feel pain and temperature is also included in that because it has a little bit to do with the size of the fibers. But essentially, if you think about it as 5 senses, that's good enough. Then our next section is really what we call interoception, which is the internal, those clues and cues in our body, of which we're mostly unaware of, or I was. Those are the cues that are coming from your gut, from your heart, from your chest, connective tissue. And just for an example for that for people is if you were to just sit and try to feel your heart beating in your chest in this moment. And if you can't quite feel it, place a hand over where you know your heart to be and see if that helps you to get in touch with that heartbeat. And that's an interoception. Or if you're feeling like your gut is, maybe there's some sensations in your gut, some gurgling, all of that, interoception. So your next section of the orchestra is what we call proprioception. And this has to do with your posture and your movement and your gestures. And a great example of this is if we all were to close our eyes and see if you can tell where your left hip joint is in relation to your right hand. How do you know with your eyes closed where these joints are? Well, that's proprioception. The fourth section is the cognitive, which we're all very familiar with, our conceptualizations, our ability to calculate, our abstractions. And then the last, but certainly not the least, is our emotions. So our emotions are another section of our intelligence. And all of these components communicate with each other in a very interdependent, very finely tuned way, so that our body really is this social, emotional, physical sense organ. And I'm going to stop there and just sort
I
of
love
see what
this. So
reactions are.
I don't know, I don't know what other people are experiencing at home, but I keep, every time you keep talking, I keep moving, and just building that awareness. And so, Karen, my next question to you is, you just walked us through how complex our bodies are, how much intelligence they have. Why do you think that so many of us prioritize the brain over the body? Why do you think that we take it more seriously, are more attuned to the signs, the cognitive over the somatic?
Mm-hmm. I love this question, and I think about it a lot. And it has to do, I mean, in some ways, us prioritizing the cognitive aspects has really gotten us where we are today, right? All of the innovation, all of the research we're doing, our evolution as a species. I mean, if it weren't for our amazing cognition, we may not be where we are today. Well, we certainly wouldn't be. And we've also been socialized and sort of trained in a way to prioritize our thinking minds, especially in the West. I think there still are some cultures where the brain is not as prioritized, but certainly for most of us, that's how we were trained and how we continue to function. And so in prioritizing this sort of being in our heads cognitive expression, we really unlearn how to feel. And in some ways, that's also somewhat adaptive, because if you were to be, having to beat your heart and breathe your lungs and digest the lunch, I mean, you'd get nothing done. You'll be all day dealing with these internal processes. So, instinctively, intuitively, that makes sense. And I think that I don't want to demote or say that our cognitive aspects are less important, but just that they're equally important, and that with practice, we can really return to this wisdom that's distributed throughout.
And you know what that makes me recall? Last month at Let's Do Lunch, we had Alicia Doherty, another friend and colleague of ours, who is here today with us again. Hi, Alicia. Thanks for coming back as a participant. And one of the things Alicia and I were talking about, we were talking about living fearlessly. And the same kind of conversation, right? Fear is clearly very adaptive. Fear is an important data point. Fear keeps us safe. However, we run into issues when we, just like, right, the brain is very important, the brain is very adaptive. We run into issues when we let it, supersede other data points. Or blind us from some of the other data. And Karen, it's really interesting, as you were speaking, what I was thinking is so many of the women that I talk to, they were trained and socialized to be much more attuned to how they make others feel, right? That cognitive kind of EQ that we're always told women have better EQ. They were trained to be so attentive to how they make others feel, and yet we were so not trained, most of us, to think about how we feel in our bodies. And there's tons of data on this, right? That people believe that women complain more about their pain. When, Karen, I think the research actually is that women have higher pain tolerances. And there's just so much learning and unlearning that has to happen here. And I'm so excited about this conversation. We're just scratching the surface. I have another question for you. I'm starting to see a question or two come into the Q&A. Those of you who are with us today, please put your Q&A using that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We want to hear from you. And Karen, while we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, oftentimes we talk about our gut. Trust our gut. What does your gut say? And one of my favorite things that I've learned from you is that there is science behind this idea of our gut, that our guts almost function as mini brains, which kind of blew my mind. So could you walk us through how we should be thinking about our gut and this idea of the gut as a second or a mini brain?
Oh, yes. This, and this research is, again, it happened since I was in medical school. So it's in the last decade or two that we've really come to understand how many neurons and neuronal connections sit in our gut, in our intestine, in our abdomen, and around our stomach, like millions of neurons. And so to call it a mini brain is not a hyperbole. There really is a mini brain sitting in there. And not only that, but most of us are familiar with the neurotransmitter serotonin. Well, it turns out that the gut produces about 95% of the serotonin in our bodies, which is also why, if any of you have taken the serotonin reuptake inhibitor medication, you'll notice quite a bit of GI side effects in the first few days when you take that medicine.
Karen, can I pause you? Serotonin inhibitor medication, is this like an antidepressant? What kind of medication is that?
Yeah, so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are medications used for depression. And the idea is to really elevate the levels of serotonin to help with mood stabilization. And so often people experience GI, sort of stomach cramps, nausea, diarrhea in the first few days of taking those. And so that's just another indicator of how important the gut is in that synthesis of serotonin. So that's one example of how the gut is a real mini brain, including the neurotransmitters that we think of really swirling around in the brain and above the neck. The other thing here that I just want to mention, sort of this feeling of gut feeling is different for everybody. So to really begin to get to know your own body. So if you're sensing something in the area of your gut, sort of above your umbilicus, below the chest, what is that feeling? Is it that your body's hungry? What's the communication there? Or is it that there's impending danger? Or have you just had what we call an intuitive hit, where there's the gut's communicating something and you're not sure what it is, but there's something there. So that's different for everybody, Randi. But the principle is there's so much going on, and the more we pay attention, we'll be able to get to know and test it out. Don't believe it, test it out. The other really fascinating thing of the gut, and this relates to gut feeling and intuition, is that we now know that the gut's also, we consider it an endocrine organ. And for me as an endocrinologist, the most amazing thing is that we now harness some of those hormones released by the gut to help patients control type 2 diabetes, because we understand that those hormones are involved in regulation of blood sugar after a meal. So it's not only a mini brain, it's also an endocrine organ. So there's a lot going on in the gut, and we're only beginning to really understand what the implications are for science and for our nervous systems.
It's incredible. It's one of these things where the more answers we get, the more questions. And that's okay, right? Because you and I love questions. That's the stock of our trade, right? Is just getting curious. And, it's interesting how everybody experiences the gut feeling differently. I'll tell you, in my body, when I do not have a gut feeling, when I am not at ease, I feel a tightness and a heaviness in my chest. It is a physical discomfort that slouches me forward, that makes me feel like I want to stop breathing or breathe differently. And for me, when I have a gut feeling or an intuitive hit, I find it's me at my lightest. Like there's almost this subtle effervescence, under the surface. And one thing that I like to ask people, and we could do this exercise now, Karen, you might have a similar exercise, is to remember back to a time that they were significantly at ease and a time where they were at dis-ease, right? Or a state of uneasiness, and to kind of feel that. And we could do that. Karen, I'm going to default to you, or we got a great question in the Q&A about, maybe it's related, about in addition to signals of burnout, what are signals of thriving? How do I know when I am doing right by my body? So you're our expert. Where do we want to take this in the conversation and answering this question and connecting the dots for everyone?
Well, we could actually, I might suggest we do an exercise first, but I really want to get to this issue of the thriving nervous system at some point, because there's so much there. So maybe we can address that in just a little bit, and starting with, and do the body posture, the recall of the body posture that you wanted to do first.
You know what? We can do that, right? And so I just want to encourage everyone to just close your eyes for a second. And think about a time where you were in a moment of stress. And bring yourself back there. Let the colors and the textures and the place come back into view. The people, the players, the situation. And just observe what's happening in your body. What's clenching? What's hot? What's cold? Now take a deep breath in audibly, and a deep breath out. One more audible inhale. And audible exhale. Placing your right hand on your heart and your left hand on your belly, settling into a few silent breaths here. And now recall a time where you were happy, or celebrating, or satisfied, a specific moment. Again, let the colors and the textures of that scene come back into view. Let the players and the conversations come back into view. And relive that moment for just a moment. Now observing what feels different. What feels clenching or relaxed? Light or heavy? Hot or cold? And saying goodbye to that moment with a lot of love and gratitude. Blink your eyes open and come back to me. I want to hear from you in the chat. What was different? Karen, what was different for you in both of those experiences? And maybe walk us through what one might be happening to us in our bodies when that happens.
Yeah. So I absolutely love what you just did, because it shows, again, this didn't take much time. Were we even here for a minute, right? So it's that shift of using the body as an energy system, thinking of it as a verb, and really looking at what's hot, what's cold, and bringing awareness and attention to all of those areas that are involved in that stress response. So the contraction, the tensing of the jaws. So many of us carry stress in our jaws and in our skeletal system. And
Karen, someone wrote that in the chat. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm seeing people come in through the chat. And some of the people are saying in the second scenario where we remembered the moment that we enjoyed, they observed their jaw unclench. The biggest difference was in, one person says, in my shoulders and my jaw. Another person says expansiveness. So we're seeing a theme where people experience a similar sensation, expansiveness, release, differently. And so please keep going. You were just so simpatico with our participants. I wanted to connect the dots there. Bring us back to the science now.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so what's happening is when you had us take that deep breath in and out, essentially what you're doing there is you're stimulating the nerves that are around the chest, that are what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, that getting back to the question earlier, that's the thriving, or sometimes called the rest and digest system. So as we stimulate that thriving system just with a couple of breaths, the cascaded effects are our heart rate goes down, our breathing, well, if you're breathing in and out, you're controlling it, but then when you release, the breathing slows down. And there's sort of a dampening of the stress hormones that are released when we're feeling stress. And we get this chance for this rest and digest system to come back on board and help us feeling more relaxed, relax our muscles. And notice also how the body is always in the present moment. So our thoughts can be thinking about stuff we did yesterday that we feel fearful of or shouldn't have done, things in the future that we're anticipating. But the body is here and now. So as you took us into that visualization to think of something, the body didn't know that it was in the past. The body's like, oh, this is how I'm feeling now. And then also, as we were visualizing something relaxing, the body went straight there. So it's quite it's sort of a hack, but we forget about it, right? We think, oh, I've got to think my thoughts and I've got to sort this out in my head. No, if you just get back into your body, remember that time, your body will then assist you to bring that thriving nervous system back on board.
I love the simplicity of the awareness because it's something that every single person who's with us here today can walk away with, which is just the power of observation, right? This idea of almost being like an anthropologist of our own life. Like, what changes when you're just collecting data, right, with no judgment? And it's really interesting, Karen. One of the things that I think about this, and it comes up a lot with my clients, I imagine it does for you because we both work with people who work in these really demanding kind of high performance environments, is this idea of boundaries. And one of the things that I have found has been, just in my personal life with the women I work with, is using this kind of the EQ of our anatomy, which I know is one of your terms, which I love, to understand when we are breaching our own boundaries or violating our own boundaries. We can talk ourselves into, no, it's okay. Of course I can take on that meeting, that project, that phone call, that pitch. And intellectually, we're doing some crazy calculus around, well, if I don't do this, they're going to judge me. And so the ends justify the means. And so this isn't a boundaries issue. This is a bandwidth issue. And I just need to show up right now. But our bodies, right, to that person who asked the question, how do we know when we're feeling burnt out? Let's start building the awareness before we get to burnout. Let's start building the awareness around stress and around boundaries. The next time someone asks you to do something, before you say yes or no, let's just close our eyes. And are you, with your clenched jaw, and again, I'm just reading through some of the things we saw in the reaction. When I thought back to my own memory, I started perspiring, right? Are we having the reactions in our body of someone who is at ease with the decision we are about to make? Or are we having the reaction of someone whose body is saying, hello, do not do this, reconsider? And so I'm curious, Karen, that's how I think about, boundaries. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around this kind of, EQ of our anatomy, boundaries, stress, burnout, anything else around that?
Oh my goodness, so much. I want to pick up a couple of threads. Let me see. I think it might be useful just to review a little bit the body's response to stress, to begin to recognize some of those symptoms. Now, I know that that's already in a stress state, but let's just go there first, and then I'm going to backtrack from there. So the two hormones that really kick in when we become stressed, like most of us are in this moment, or when we perceive a threat, is the epinephrine that gets kicked in very quickly. And that's the hormone, Randi, that makes you sweat. Increases your heart rate, right?
I'm still coming down. I have to be honest. It's like once the body gets there, it's very hard to come down. But I'm really excited about this because, Karen, you're about to settle a huge debate between me and my husband, which is that I believe that stress hormones, certainly ones I've experienced in the past, have taken years off my life. So please continue because you're about to settle a really big argument in my house.
Okay, so I'll continue talking about that, but I do want to get back to the emotional intelligence of anatomy. So you're going to have to whip me off this call, kicking and screaming, but here I go.
I love it. Keep going.
So yes, so this adrenaline response of the sympathetic nervous system is all the things we're familiar with: heart rate, the blood pressure, and it's, remember, Randy, it's an intelligent response. Our bodies, when we were walking the savannah and a lion came, we had to divert blood away from digesting our lunch into our muscles so we could run. So all of these effects of that hormone that kicks in right away are adaptive and intelligent. The second hormone that kicks in, takes a little longer and lasts a little longer, is the stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol is my friend because I'm an endocrinologist. But when it gets kicked in, it actually increases blood sugar. It helps the brain to metabolize blood sugar quickly, so we can really think well. We've got the sugar energy to do the running away or the fighting. The other impact that cortisol has, that I think is really important to understand, is that it dampens or suppresses all our other systems that we don't need in that stressful situation. So reproduction, we don't need to be having sex when you're running away from a tiger. It suppresses growth, it suppresses our digestion, and it suppresses our immune system. And when the threat is over, and like you said, I'm still feeling like I'm still sweating, well, it takes a while for the body to get back into balance. And how we get back into balance is really informed by our own history of trauma, physical or psychological. It's also informed by our genetics. And it's informed by how good you are to get back into that thriving state, like that question we had in the Q&A earlier. How do I get into that thriving state? So all of that impacts the long-term effects of stress in our life. So if you and your husband are having an argument around what are the effects, it might be that both of you are right, because he's experiencing it in one way based on his history, genetics, and how quickly he can access his thriving system and get himself into a rest and digest situation, versus your experience with what you bring uniquely to a stressful situation.
It's funny that you mentioned this too. I know that we have quite a few working moms with us here today. We have some people who aren't working moms. But, it's funny. I've said to people, usually at the end of a president's tenure, you see those pictures circulate on the internet before and after. And I joke with working parents in the pandemic. It's like, I wish that I had taken a before picture, because I feel like I have wrinkles that I did not have 12 years ago, certainly 12 years ago, 12 months ago, that I have developed in the last year, being just like every other working mom, having to live my life without any of the infrastructure that I had designed to support it. I tease my husband that he's going gray in this last year. And so I love what you share about the fact that each person has their own reaction to stress, informed by our genetics, our history with trauma. And, I think the answer to everything is it's multifaceted, and that's what I'm taking away from this, right? That we're all living and dynamic beings, and yet each one of us has this ability to harness this intelligence in our body. So while we're on the subject of debates, right, thank you for settling this in our house. I would have preferred that you would have taken my side, but I'll let it go. While we're on this subject of debates, I know another big debate is, right, we had the TED Talk about power poses, right, and then everybody power posed. And then the science hadn't been replicated. And so, of course, because this is how our society works, we're like, let's swing the pendulum back, right? We operate in black and white, not in gray. Throw out the power pose. Karen, once and for all, should we power pose?
The answer is yes, maybe. I'm not going to say it. I will say, for those who are not familiar, the original research by Amy Cuddy was really compelling, because participants, both men and women, assumed a posture that they thought of as powerful, either sitting or standing. And they measured hormones. They had increases in testosterone, the male hormone, both men and women. They had decreases in cortisol. They had self-reported self-efficacy went up, and feelings of power really increased. Yes, that was not replicated. However, that may be because of some minutiae in the statistical analysis methods that have subsequently changed. So the fact that it hasn't been...
You mean, hold on, you mean the science was complex and we wanted an instant gratification, one sentence answer? That doesn't sound like our culture at all.
That's exactly, I mean, it's always more complex than it seems, right? So the way I'm choosing to think about this is really checking it out for myself and with my clients. And I'm actually a big fan of adopting any posture based on our proprioceptive part of that orchestra to help us develop a mood or a state of being that we would like to embody. I have seen it works for me, and I've seen it work for my clients. So I think the science is, we can't really hang our hat on it, but it's not completely debunked. However, again, my own personal experience in this is very interesting. So I like to power pose, and I like to do all sorts of other poses.
I love it. I actually recently just learned an exercise from a colleague of mine named Miriam Grogan, who runs a leadership program over at PwC, about coming to our desks with confidence. So Miriam and I just finished piloting a program for Georgetown Law Center together. And Karen, should we do one of your exercises and do one of my exercises? What do you want to try here?
Yeah, why don't you go first, and then I'll go after you. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, and so I learned this from Miriam, and I told her, Miriam's not here today. She promised she was going to watch the recording. So Miriam, we're shouting you out, which is that we all sit back to back in Zoom and just sit for a second, just kind of observe. Like, I was kind of sitting slumped over, part my absolute relaxation and talking to someone who's a dear friend, and part probably just bad habits. And what Miriam teaches that I absolutely love is, before you sit down for another meeting at your desk, stand up for a moment. So we're just going to stand up, okay? And now bring your chair to touch that space behind your knees, and just slowly sit down like you were riding an elevator. So I'm not into power posing personally, but this is my new confidence move. Karen, what's yours?
Oh, I absolutely love this. I'm just actually getting in touch with the sensations that are happening as I sat down. And it's really that erect posture. It's becoming aware. And it's different for everybody. So a power stance or a sitting power might be one thing for one person and something for somebody else. My power pose, or I call it my confidence pose, is me standing with my arms out at my side, and I feel like I'm growing roots all the way up. So I lift myself up. I put a smile on my face because I am warm and compassionate and inclusive, and then rooted and powerful. So that's what I like to do. And as I'm doing it now, I can feel, gee, I could be smiling more and thinking about somebody I love in that posture.
And Karen, I love this. Someone just put into the chat, this feels like present posing, and she loves it. So we love that you love it. And we encourage you to get up and experiment with this. Karen, you first.
I want to just say one more thing. If this seems all a little bit weird and woo-woo, think about a person that really represents a quality that you love in their way of being or in their posture, who makes that quality come alive. And so I think of kindness, I immediately think of the Dalai Lama. And even if you can't understand a word he says, by his posture, his smile, his whole being oozes kindness. And so maybe invite people to think about somebody who's powerful or confident and see what it is about that posture, and go from there for themselves as just as an entryway into this.
I love it. And I love that you named like that this might feel woo woo for people, right? We spent the first 45 minutes talking about the science of why it matters. And just observe with yourself, this has been for me is why are you so resistant to this? For me, I was so resistant to this for such a long time, right? Because of that prioritization of brain over body, always brain over body. And I think that, Karen, to your point, there is endless neuroscience, endocrinology, psychology about why this stuff matters and how, as women, it can help us live better lives because we're feeling less stress. We're feeling, I love this, what we had in the chat, right? We can be here for present pose. And what changes when you're able to show up like that in your life? Like, did anyone ever give their best performance at work when they were feeling completely stressed out? I know I didn't, right? So, Karen, we got another question in the chat for you, which is, what is your advice to reduce stress hormones more regularly beyond meditation, which is usually what is recommended? And what can you do in the moment when you feel yourself like ramping up?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question because when we are overstimulated and we've got that flood of stress hormones, honestly, sitting down and meditating, it ain't gonna cut it. And I'm a daily meditator. I love meditation. So
thank you for saying that. Wait. Thank you for saying that, because so many people turn off to this because they're like, I tried meditation, it doesn't work for me. Okay, so if you're not someone who enjoys meditating, you're not alone. So thank you for normalizing that. Back to you.
Yeah, and I want to underscore that the importance of when you are in that sort of dysregulated, and we all know what that feels like. I can go into that in more depth. Then really it's a matter of baby steps of bringing yourself back into calming before you can really enter the restoration, where you may be able to then sit and meditate. And it's things like, Randi, even talking to a friend. So maybe having to talk it out to somebody who's loving. Stroking an animal has tremendous effects on activating that sort of more restorative, calming nervous system. Maybe listening to some music. Taking a walk in nature is, for a lot of my clients, that's what they do. They actually just have to shift where they are. Because often what happens is you're in front of a computer, you read that email and you're like, oh, so get up, get out of that situation, get your body away, not to escape, but just to give yourself chance to recover a little, walk into nature. The other thing, don't underestimate the effect of the deep breathing, and there are various breathing exercises that you can find out there. So there are several of these things, steps you can do to get your body into a more calmer place. And then you can think about sitting and becoming aware of your sensations and becoming more sort of internal. It's very hard to go from dysregulation to internal. And there are actually good reasons for that. I actually just want to say...
I just want to connect a few dots before you continue, because you said so many great things. I'm hearing talk it out with a friend, like get the words out of your head and make them verbal. Sharing them with someone who can help you hold that space. One is, if you have a dog, there's incredible science between just petting a dog. I don't have a dog, maybe I should rethink that. And then I'm also hearing you say, get up, walk around, change your physical environment. All of these things can have somatic responses, can change that kind of psychosomatic connection. And then final thought on this, and we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes.
Yeah, I just want to say that the most important foundation for all of us, and we're all, I'm guilty of this too, is this: remember the three basics: good nutrition, good sleep, and regular exercise. You can do all the meditating and yoga in the world, but if those three aren't in line, it's very hard for your body to actually then to access the calmness in your body, and for your body to really harness its intelligence. So I just wanted to make sure I said that.
100%, and they're more important than ever because so many people are having issues with sleep. during the pandemic, right? Especially. So just repeat them for us one more time. What are the 3 things that we need to be absolutely foundational?
Yeah, so it's good nutrition, good diet, and there's lots of resources on that. Sleep, numbers vary, but somewhere between 7 to 9 hours for the average person, and regular exercise, not just slow movement, but actually getting out, getting your heart rate up.
Yeah. And Karen, we're going to bring it to a close in a few minutes. Any final thoughts that you want to share when it comes to thriving versus surviving, when it comes to the mind-body connection? What do our participants really need to know that they haven't already heard or they need to hear again?
I think the important thing is for us to know that we experience everything through our bodies, whether we're aware of it or not. Developing that awareness takes practice. Most of us have unlearned that. So be patient with yourself. If you feel numb or you don't feel it, that's okay. It takes practice. And, you know, my longing for everybody on this call and for my life and my clients and for the world is that we'll learn to see our bodies as places of refuge, intelligence, and connection, so that we can have full physical, emotional, and social wellness in our world.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. Um, I know I learned so many things with you today, Karen. Thank you so much. And want to hear from you in the chat. What is one thing that you are taking away from today or that you learned? Just one takeaway that you are going to leave here and practice or think about or get curious about. And while we wait for those to come in, again, I just want to thank Karen one more time for coming. Karen, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom. Thank you for your friendship. You are such an important person in my life, and I'm just so honored to get to share you with the Something Major community. Again, for those of you who joined us today for the first time, I want to thank you again for coming and share some upcoming events that we have here at Something Major. Again, Something Major is dedicated to helping working moms and working women live their very best, most fulfilled, least burnt out lives. I know we all learned a lot of tactics from Karen to do that. And want to share a few more events that we have coming up. So when it comes, I know some of you are working moms. We have a Working Moms Burnout Bootcamp series, pairing working moms 1 year into the pandemic with the resources that they need and the experts that they need to stay sane. So on Wednesday evening, I'm sitting down with one of my gurus, parenting expert and author, Claire Lerner, for a fireside chat. We'll be taking your questions on pandemic parenting that makes you not want to pull your hair out of your head. And we'll also be sitting down on April 28th. Registration isn't open, but look out for it, with creativity and playroom designer Anne Gilliard for a session on blessing and addressing our mess. And how we can live our lives with more creativity, more flow in our physical and our emotional lives. Lastly, we're going to be having our next Let's Do Lunch on Tuesday. Note, it's going to be a Tuesday, April 27th, with women's wealth expert Erin Schultz for how we can marry our money to our goals. And we'll be having a panel during Infertility Awareness Week on April 21st. We'll be sitting down with another double board certified physician, this time Dr. Ellen Goldstein, and 2 women who have gone through fertility struggles while working, to discuss what that experience is like. Again, Brittany in the chat, if she hasn't already, is going to pop in my contact information. Something Major has tons of free and on-demand resources to help you, again, live that more fulfilled, less burnt out, more intentional work life. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. We'll be sharing lots of resources from Something Major and lots of resources from Karen. So Karen, one more time, just thank you so much for coming, for your friendship and for your wisdom. It's been such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Randi. I really enjoyed this conversation, and lots of love to you and your entire Something Major community. Such an honor.
We'll see you all soon. Thanks again, Karen. Thanks, everyone.